I'm George Payne. It is April 19th, 2016, and I am interviewing today my old friend Mike Kaplan, an attorney in Nashville, Tennessee. Mike, thanks for agreeing to do the interview today.
My pleasure.
State your full name.
Michael George Kaplan.
And when and where were you born?
I was born on April 6, 1946 in Pasco, Washington.
And let's start talking about your family and start with your grandparents. Tell us a little something about your grandparents and also the China experience that I've always been
Okay, well,
fascinated.
my grandparents on my father's side were Russian immigrants, came over in 1899 to the United States, and my father was born in the United States in a place called Linden, New Jersey in 1917. My grandmother also came over from Poland, part of Poland that sometimes was in the in Russia and sometimes in Poland. And met my grandfather, whose name was Isidore Silberlust. They married in the early 20th century, and my grandfather on my mother's side and his brother were in the fur business, and so my grandmother and grandfather lived in China and ran part of the fur business from China. My mother grew up in China.
And where in China do you
Tianjin, China, which is now called Tianjin.
And you have some memorabilia from those days, is that right?
Well, they had a very nice lifestyle in China until the Japanese invasion of China in the mid-1930s, and they came back from China to the United States and brought with them all their furnishings and China and so forth. They lived a very nice lifestyle over there.
And do you recall them growing up?
I recall my grandmother. I did not know my grandfather.
And did she talk about that experience?
Talked about China and, and they were in the American concession in Tianjin, and, they had limited access to the Chinese people. Most of the concessions were primarily British. My mother went to a British school in China growing up, and their friends were Americans, British, and what they called white Russians.
And when and where did your parents meet?
My parents met in the early 40s in Washington, D.C. They had met originally in New York, where my father was stationed in the Navy. He and my mother got set up on a blind date, liked each other, and then eventually they worked their way down to Washington, D.C. and got married there.
And your father was in the Navy?
My father was a career Navy.
Mm-hmm. And did your mom work?
My mother worked later, after I was about 9 or 10 years old, worked for the Army in Red Bank, New Jersey.
So you grew up in New Jersey?
I grew up mostly in New Jersey. My father was stationed in Washington State after World War II, and I lived in Washington State for a year or so, and then his career brought him back to Philadelphia first and then on to New Jersey.
And you have one sibling, is that correct?
I have a sister whose name is Georgia, and she lives in Gainesville, Georgia.
Interesting. And you did your schooling in New Jersey?
Well, I started school in New York City, actually, while my father was on sea duty. We lived actually in the Bronx for a very short while. I started school there, and I was 4 years old. I was in an experimental class in New York City, and I went through the first grade and then started the second grade, and then we moved to a place called Linden, New Jersey, where I started school in Jersey.
So was all of your elementary or most of your elementary in Linden?
No, when I was in the fourth grade, we moved to Middletown, New Jersey, which is where most of my education occurred. I went to elementary school, I went to middle school, and then ultimately high school in Middletown, New Jersey.
And so you went to high school there.
Yes.
And tell me a little bit about high school. Did you?
Well, I was in a area of New Jersey that was growing rapidly. We moved into a new subdivision that had once been a farm, and that was the trend in Jersey, was the building after, in the 50s, of these large subdivisions, and people from the city started moving out of town. You know, it started with Levittown in the New Jersey, New York area. And so I went to a fairly large high school that there were 1,600 people in my class, and it was so large that we actually had to have split sessions because the school wasn't large enough to accommodate everybody. But I had a very good high school experience, and you know, that the split sessions only lasted 1 year, and then they worked it out. And you know, I had a good high school experience. The classes were shaped by, I guess, the nature of your interests. And you know, I went to high school, though I had 1,600 people in my class, I went to high school with the same people that I went to in middle school, where we were in A, B, and C sections, and I was in an A section. And those same college prep students went to school with me all the way through high school.
So being in an A section meant you were smarter or did better?
Smarter
than
or
the
college
B
prep oriented.
Okay. Did you play sports in high school?
I played on the tennis team.
And you played tennis for a long time, but you've now retired from the court.
I've switched over to golf.
Okay. You ended up at Vanderbilt. Why Vanderbilt, coming out of New Jersey?
Right. Well, my sister, who was 3 years older than me, although 2 years older than me in school, ended up going to Western Kentucky. She spoke very highly of Vanderbilt. I was thinking about potentially going to medical school as a high school senior, and so Vanderbilt had a good medical program and pre-med, and so I applied to Vanderbilt. I'd never actually been to the South other than on trips to take my sister to school, and so I wanted a change of scenery from New Jersey. So I got accepted to Vanderbilt and decided to come here.
And that was the first time you had really come south, south of Kentucky.
Correct.
What were your impressions of coming south?
Well, it was certainly different. Vanderbilt was very different, and that is that Vanderbilt was a very white, upper middle class place, of very wealthy people attending there, very smart people attending Vanderbilt. So I was a little bit intimidated. It was a good experience. The academics were very rigorous, and you know, there was plenty of time to have fun as well. Did
you sense any difference in the way you were treated as a New Jerseyite than the rest of us Southerners?
Well, I was clearly a Northerner, but I got along with everybody, and the vast majority of my friends were all Southern, and I didn't really experience that much. Although the fraternity system was different back then, and very clearly, you know, they had at Vanderbilt 2 Jewish fraternities, and then the other fraternities. And you know, if you were Jewish, that you went into one of those 2 fraternities.
And you decided not to pledge, is that right?
I decided ultimately not to be in the fraternity system.
Who was the first person you met at Vanderbilt?
I met a fellow from Montgomery, Alabama named Bobby Siegel, and when he first spoke to me, I had trouble understanding what he was saying because he had a fairly heavy Southern accent. I've gotten used to it since then. And
I gather you have remained friends and close to him throughout.
Bobby and I were roommates. We roomed right next to each other. I actually had a separate room. Vanderbilt was very good about that, and that is it had lots of single rooms for incoming freshmen rather than roommates. But Bobby lived next door to me my freshman and sophomore year, and then we roomed together in campus housing our junior year. So we were very close friends.
Did he go to law school also?
He went to the University of Alabama and then got a graduate degree at Harvard and practices law in Montgomery, Alabama to this day.
And I believe he's active in the Bar Association?
Active in the Bar Association, was president of the Alabama Bar Association.
Going back to high school briefly, one of the seminal events in our lives was the assassination of President Kennedy. Do you
That's
remember?
Right. Remember it vividly. I was a senior in high school. It was November of my senior year. I was after school and someone had announced to everybody that President Kennedy had been shot. And then, we were glued to the television for the next few days. My parents actually discussed the idea of driving down to Washington, D.C. from New Jersey. We decided against it, but we were glued to the TV. It was a stunning situation.
And going back to Vanderbilt, did you play tennis at Vanderbilt?
I played on the freshman team. I had to buckle down and work on my studies after the freshman year, but I played on the freshman tennis team.
And what did you do during the summers? Did you work or play or?
I worked one summer as a canvasser for the Democratic Party in New Jersey. I walked around and visited door-to-door homes to talk to registered voters about making sure that they were registered and who they might vote for in upcoming elections. My father, after he got out of the Navy, became a hospital administrator. He worked at a large mental institution in New Jersey, and I worked 2 summers in the food service department at that hospital.
And this political activity in New Jersey didn't involve walking around money, did it, as we say down
We didn't make
south?
much money working for the Democratic
But
Party.
did you pass out money?
No, we didn't pass out money either.
I just wondered, since New Jersey has a interesting reputation.
I did work for a lawyer who ran the canvassing program, and that was my first involvement with a lawyer and going to his office on a regular basis and discussing matters with him. He was very active politically and ultimately became a judge.
And did this affect your decision to go to law school after Vanderbilt?
It played a role. I knew what practicing law a little bit was like, and I, in high school, won surrogate for a day and went to visit the county court seat and spent a day as the surrogate, which is the equivalent of the probate judge. Turns out that is a large part of my practice.
You graduated from Vanderbilt in '68, is that correct?
Correct.
And a lot of our focus back then was on the military.
Yes.
What was your situation there?
Well, the draft was accessible to everybody who graduated from college. Excuse me, there were no deferments for graduate school. That had been cut off. And so anyway, I did not want to go into the military, and I got drafted when I got home, and I had an ulcer, a problem with ulcers, and it turned out that those ulcers got me a medical deferment, and I ended up not serving in the military. And my father always said that being a career Navy man, he spent enough time for the both of us.
And most of us did spend our time avoiding the draft back then. So you decided to go to Vanderbilt. Why Vanderbilt Law School?
Well, my parents liked it a lot. I liked Vanderbilt a lot. It was a very good law school. I did apply to several other law schools and got in, but I thought that Vanderbilt would be a good place, and that's what I chose to do.
Did you overall enjoy Vanderbilt Law School?
Yes, I thought it was great.
And which of your professors were memorable or made a really good impression on you?
Well, there were a number of them. There was Tom McCoy, who taught contracts. He had just started out, but a very, very bright, capable person who had a lot of interest in the students. There was Paul Hartman, who was a legendary tough guy in class, but really had the interests of the students in mind. His classes were very intimidating, and you had better be prepared if he called upon you because he was a very tough questioner. So there was Herman Troutman, who taught tax. I ended up going into taxation, and I thought he did a very, very good job teaching tax.
Many people who did not do very well didn't seem to do as well with Professor Troutman as you did.
Right.
Did he have a special affection for people who were interested in and did well in tax?
Well, I took to tax. You know, I took tax starting in my second year of law school, and I took all the tax courses. I took a tax seminar, and it came to me very, very easily. It didn't come to as many people in the same way, so tax was not an area that interested lots of law students. Most people wanted to go into litigation.
Did this give you a sense that this might be an easier place to establish a reputation or?
Yes. I very clearly in law school developed an interest in being a tax lawyer.
And what did you do during the summers, between the 2 summers that you had between your first year, second year?
Well, the first year I wasn't able to get a job working for a law firm. I drove a Coke truck in Nashville, Tennessee, and delivered Coca-Colas around the Nashville area. It was a very, very tough job. Took a lot of time and didn't make that much money. The second year I worked for a lawyer who had been the U.S. attorney in Nashville, but was a solo practitioner named Kenneth Harwell, who had a general practice, did a lot of litigation, did estate planning, and did real estate work, and I basically was his assistant for the summer.
Was this a walk-in opportunity, or did someone at the law school recommend him or recommend you to him?
I applied to several law firms, and Kenneth had a need, and I went to work for him.
I don't recall.
It was a good learning experience.
I don't recall him. What, did he die relatively?
He died shortly after I graduated from law school, but he was a very fine individual.
Which of your classmates that you got to know are still active in the community, or who did you become good friends with?
Well, Bob Rutherford was in my class. He's in the Nashville bar. Roger May, Alan Lentz, Mike Philbin, who just passed away, was a very close friend of mine in law school.
When you say Mike, Nashville has always had a Catholic mafia like John Sigenthaler and Tom Higgins, and we kind of knew the second wave of Catholic mafia, which today we don't have anything like that. But that was a great crowd of Mike and the Mondellis. And
Gino Marchetti was in that firm. There was a fellow named Dick Taylor, who was Father Ryan graduate and a very good litigator. And they represented the Diocese of Nashville. I ended up, as a result of referrals, doing tax work for the diocese from time to time.
And so not only were the Catholic mafia friends, but a good source of revenue, and they were a lot of fun too, weren't they?
They were a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's what, they made life much more entertaining for all of us. When you got out of law school, what did you do?
Well, I had a strong interest in taxation, and I wasn't able to secure a job with a law firm as a tax lawyer. I did get a job offer from the Internal Revenue Service to work in Boston, but working in general litigation, which was basically enforcing tax liens, and is an interesting part of the practice, but it's not really what I call hardcore tax work. So I decided to go to NYU to get a master's in taxation. And my parents weren't particularly happy about me spending another year in law school, but I decided that was the right thing to do. NYU was good enough to give me a scholarship and loans that I was able to basically underwrite most of my own expenses.
When you say you applied to firms in Nashville, almost none of the firms had Jewish lawyers back then. Was that part, do you believe, of not getting a job after law
No,
school?
no,
Okay.
I never really, I actually didn't apply for jobs in Nashville,
Oh.
although I took the bar exam right after finishing at Vanderbilt. I was just looking for a job, potentially in New York City or other places, largely through interviews at the law school. And I never did get the right slot.
Did you enjoy your time at NYU?
Yes. NYU was very different. My law school class at Vanderbilt was in the early days of women coming into the practice of law. We only had 4 women in my class at Vanderbilt Law School. When I got to NYU, the undergraduate law school class had almost half the class was women, although in my graduate tax class at NYU, we only had 1 woman in the class. So the tax lawyers were largely men.
What did you do in the summer between your 2 years at NYU? Or was it a 1 year?
It was a 1-year program.
Okay. And when you got out of NYU, where did you go from there?
I was able to I did pretty well at NYU, and I was able to get a clerkship for the United States Tax Court working for Judge Sam Sterrett. And that was a 2-year slot.
And was he, I know the tax court is in Washington, but was he out of New York? Don't they ride circuit or?
They ride circuit, but they're all based in Washington, D.C. So I worked on Pennsylvania Avenue in the IRS. At the time, the national office of the IRS, the second floor of that building was the United States Tax Court. And all of the judges had offices there. All of the judges, there were 16 regular judges, and then there were a number of retired judges. The regular judges each had 2 law clerks each, and the retired judges had 1 law clerk. So there were, almost 40 law clerks working there. It was almost like another year of law school, and it was a great experience.
Were you close to your judge?
Yes.
And did you remain close to him after you
I
left?
remained in contact with him to some degree. He came down to Nashville to speak on several occasions, and we remained in contact for a while.
What about the other law clerks? Were there any you were particularly close to that you
I
remained
worked
in?
with a fellow named Mark Silverman, who's a lawyer in Washington, D.C. We've remained in contact over the years. I have a very close friend who's one of my closest friends named Mike Frankel, who worked for Judge Rahm at the tax court and is a lawyer in New York City. We're very close friends and see each other on a regular basis.
What were the hours like there? Is this one a cush job of 8 to 5?
No, it was long hours. Although I have an interesting story on that on that aspect of it, and that is that we worked nights and weekends because we were trying to learn the law and do a very good job. We didn't really particularly worry about government hours, although we were government employees. There was a judge named Judge Simpson who had worked for the IRS and had a law clerk who left the office to go to a class reunion one Friday afternoon a little early, and they called him in and docked him vacation pay for leaving the office a couple of hours early. And from that point forward, he worked 8:30 to 4:30. So he didn't put in the hours that the rest of us did because they wanted him to be on government standards. So my judge never worked by those rules, never was particularly concerned if I came in a little late. They knew that we were working and doing the job. So it was like practicing law.
And after you finished your clerkship of 2 years,
right,
what did you do after that?
Well, I had a very close friend that I went to NYU with who worked for a law firm in New York City that did foreign tax work, which sounded very exciting. They had strong Japanese contacts, and also they had a small office in London. So I thought it would involve travel and lots of client experience and so forth. So after interviewing primarily in New York, I really didn't interview anywhere else. I decided to go with that firm. I had received several offers from other firms that were larger firms, but this one sounded particularly intriguing to me.
Was it as exotic as you thought it would be?
It was a lot of research and writing on very complex foreign tax planning for international firms. So it was a very interesting type of job, and I did get to see how the foreign tax world worked, but it was all office work. We never met with the clients, the senior partner did, and there was no travel. So I came into the office, did research and writing every day while I was there.
And you did that for how long?
I did it for a year.
And when did you decide that you wanted to move on?
Well, towards the end of the year, I came back to Nashville to visit Mike Philbin, a friend of mine, came down here, and of course I had been out of law school for NYU and the tax court, so 3 years out of law school. By that time, Mike had become a partner in his firm, owned his own house here in Nashville. I was living in a one-bedroom apartment in New York City, and he was making more money than I was. So Nashville seemed pretty intriguing to me, and Mike indicated to me that there were very few tax lawyers in Nashville, Tennessee, and that there might be a good opportunity. So he gave me a list of firms. I wrote to a number of firms and got inquiries from those firms. I came down and interviewed with some of the firms, and then got an offer from Boult Cummings and decided to come down here. So after about a year in New York, and living in New York is a different kind of living. You're living in an apartment, you don't have a car, it's harder to do recreational things on the weekends, so forth, things that I was used to. So Nashville seemed a much better lifestyle for me.
Did they hire you sight unseen, or did?
No, I came down and interviewed with Boult to Nashville, interviewed with most of the lawyers in the firm, and then Davis Carr, who was the head of the recruiting committee at the time, came up to New York and interviewed me in my own office.
Did your firm know that you were interviewing?
They did not know.
So is this 75, 76? When is this?
I came back to Nashville in 1975. I graduated law school in 71.
And how many lawyers were at Boult when you arrived?
When I came with the Boult firm, I think that there were maybe 7 partners and 4 associates, plus me. There were 12 lawyers in total.
Who were the associates?
There was Greer Cummings, Tad Harris, and Bill Vanderveer are the ones that I remember. There may have been some others there as well.
And what was the transition like? Hours?
The transition was very different, and that is most of the time I sat in the office in New York, did research and writing, again, on very sophisticated issues dealing with international taxation. Once I got to Nashville and was a tax lawyer, anything that had tax associated with it, I got brought in on. So I worked in corporate tax, individual tax, estate tax, estate planning. I did pension work. I did state income tax work. Just the whole gamut. And I often was in my office and would get called into conference rooms and asked questions by a group of lawyers and clients sitting around a table expecting me to know the answer.
So you were the one-eyed man in the kingdom of the blind.
There we are.
Okay. And what about the culture of Boult back then?
Culture was, very nice. I worked with primarily a lawyer named Vance Berry, who was a terrific lawyer and worked in a wide variety of business areas and did some estate planning as well. I worked with Reber Boult, who was in his later years. He was in his late 60s and was focusing mostly on estate planning. I did lots of estate planning with Reber Boult and his clientele. I worked with Joe Cummings, who represented small business, and then I worked with John Connors, who was a litigator, but represented St. Thomas Hospital. Boult, at that point in time, represented the Baptist Sunday School Board, the United Methodist Publishing House, the United Methodist Board of Higher Education, and I worked on exempt organization issues as part of my tax practice.
Didn't you also work with the Gideons?
Gideons were a client of Boult at that time as well.
So you were a full-service Jewish Christian legal advisor.
The tax issues transcended religion.
Okay. And wasn't Boult, wasn't John Connors and Vance Berry, weren't they both presidents of the Nashville Bar? Do I have that wrong? Or I know John was, wasn't he?
I don't believe they were.
Okay. I just knew John was really active and a beloved lawyer.
Yes.
In the courthouse. What were your work hours like?
Work hours, it was a little different. When I worked in New York City, it was not uncommon for the lawyers to get into the office around 10 o'clock and work till 7 or 8 o'clock at night. When I got to Nashville, it was sort of an 8 o'clock to 5 o'clock, and I kind of changed that. I started coming in at 8:30 to 9, and I would work till 6 or 7 o'clock. Worked on the weekends, and again, my work ethic from New York and from the tax court carried over. I often worked weekends and, tried to get the work done.
Did you socialize with the members of the firm?
Yes. Socialized, played golf and tennis, and went out to dinner with lots of the associates. There was another associate that came on when I came on named Barry Holt, who is still at Boult to this day, along with Greer Cummings. We all socialized.
Did you have any cases of note that you can remember when you were at Boult, either as an associate? You became a partner there, didn't you?
Well, I did work. One of the big areas was we represented the Genesco retirement plan when ERISA was coming into effect, and Genesco had all of their buildings where Crest stores and other stores around the country were owned by the pension plan and leased to Genesco, and that had to all be unwound. And I worked on that with Genesco's counsel, who was a fellow named Jerry Cohen from Sutherland Asbel in Atlanta. That was very rewarding work. We worked on the Baptist Sunday School Board and the Methodist Publishing Methodist Publishing House having to comply with the unrelated business income tax that affected churches and other organizations beginning in 1976. So those were sort of monumental tasks that we had to deal with.
Is that when they starting
taxing
parsonages and things like that?
No, they taxed unrelated business income. So if you had a bookstore and you basically sold regular books, you were potentially liable for income tax on the sales that weren't in furtherance of the mission.
Do you remember any judges in particular during that time?
Well, during that time, there was Judge
Shelton Luton?
Judge Luton, who was the probate court judge. I remember that he was an older fellow, and one of the early cases that I got was a fellow who had passed away, and his will was written when he was in the military during World War II. So it was a 1940-something, 42 will that was being probated in the late 70s. And by that time, one of the witnesses had died. The other witness was still alive but blind. Both worked at the law firm Bass, Berry & Sims, so we were able to track them down and track down relatives of them. And I got affidavits from nieces of both women who had been witnesses to the will, brought those before Judge Luton. He refused to probate the will based on the affidavits, even though I felt that he could take that authority. So I had to bring the nieces in the following week to get the will probated. He was an old, by-the-book character.
And as I recall, he and his clerk of court,
Spiller Campbell.
It was their way or the highway.
Exactly.
I think many of us found that.
I learned an important lesson, and that is to find out what the court wants, which is more important sometimes than what the law actually is.
Are you familiar with the Dedrick Street pool room?
Yes. When I first came back to Nashville, Boult Cummings was in the First American Center.
Which is now, I guess,
Regions Bank.
And now something else.
Maybe so.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was on Union Street, and there was a pool hall that was up a flight of stairs on Union Street, and I, together with several friends, you being one of them, would get a sandwich and go up there and shoot pool during the lunch hour. And it was very, it was a lot of fun.
How many pool tables did they have?
Oh, they had 8 or 10 pool tables, and it was a smoky atmosphere, and there were a lot of unusual people up there all on lunch playing. The pool tables were full.
Yeah, and as I recall, that we were generally the only lawyers in there, weren't we?
We may have been the only lawyers.
And Ken Kraft was one of the players.
Yeah, an accountant in town.
Which obviously wouldn't happen in New York or Washington or...
Well, in Washington, D.C., when I was a law clerk, I played in a pool hall in Washington, D.C. with some of my fellow clerks as well.
Okay, but so maybe you corrupted me.
Maybe so.
And what brought about your departure from... you left Boult what year?
I left in 1993.
And when you arrived...
So I've been there almost 19 years.
Okay, and when you arrived, you said there were some 12 lawyers and
12
associates?
lawyers, and then when I left Boult, there were 85, and Boult Cummings was making the transition to a very large firm. And there was a general feeling among some of the lawyers there that it was important to be a large firm to be able to successfully practice law. And I wasn't in the leadership, so when we had partnership meetings, the main emphasis was on billing more, collecting more, and profitability of the firm. And it became, in my estimation, less collegial and less of a fun place to work. So anyway, I had a very close friend named Tom Sherrard, who I used to play golf with from time to time, and I sort of had made the decision that I wanted to probably do something different, and Tom came to me and indicated that they were very interested in having a tax lawyer join their firm. And after discussions and a lot of soul searching and so forth, I decided to join Sherrard and Roe.
And Tom had left a big firm.
Tom had left the Tribune firm. He had been a professor at the Vanderbilt Law School, then practiced law, and then decided to form his own firm, which he did 35 years ago.
And how big was Sherrard and Roe when you arrived?
Oh, I think there were about 20 lawyers at that point in time. So it had been fairly successful, and its niche was to get very bright lawyers who liked working in a small firm atmosphere, but at the same time with an emphasis on doing fairly sophisticated work. So it was a very good firm to work for.
And who are the lawyers who have made a real difference with Sherrard and Roe?
Well, you know, Tom Sherrard is a wonderful lawyer and a wonderful leader who, you know, cares about both the lawyers and the staff. One of the hallmarks of the Sherrard firm was the fact that the partners didn't appear to be as greedy or as concerned about how much money they made each year. The firm was very, very successful, and the money just flowed properly, but it wasn't an obsession with the lawyers there. So the atmosphere was very collegial, very work together, you know, and there were a lot of good people there. Bill Harbison is there, and John Voight, Kim Brown, Andre Blumstein was there for many, many years. She was one of the reasons that I came over. She had been at the Tribune firm as well. So it had a lot of very lawyers that I highly respected and enjoyed working with over the years.
During your period of lawyering in Nashville, how many or which of your friends became judges?
Well, Carol McCoy became a judge. Mike Mondelli became a judge. Claudia Bonneman became a judge. I'm sure there are a bunch of other people who have become judges as well.
And did this change your relationship with them?
Not really, because I appear in probate court from time to time in front of Judge Kennedy these days, but I typically would not be involved in litigation, so that I still have judges as friends.
And how has the practice changed since back in the day for you?
Well, it's very different in the sense that technology has taken over. You know, I got my first computer in 1985 that had some tax programs and had some word processing programs. You know, but when I first started working at the tax court, which was my first job, I hand wrote opinions, and then we had secretaries transcribe them into typing. And if you made a mistake typing, you know, it was very, very difficult. You'd have to retype the entire page. Later on, that changed. The other technology was when I was at the tax court, Lexis, which was a research tool, had just come out. So we had started looking at it, but it was fairly unsophisticated at that point in time. And so it was hard to work with. It's gotten much, much better and much more focused. And young people are very, very good at Lexis these days. But you know, we no longer have a significant library. Everything is done on the computer. And the internet has changed that as well. You know, if you want to get an opinion, you can just type it up on Google, and the opinion comes down to you without having to go through any resource.
When you were with the tax court, did you have a sense that the judges might think that Lexis just wouldn't find everything they needed and that you should rely more on the old, you know, gut work and the library that we did in law school?
Well, when I was at the tax court, none of the judges used Lexis, and it was a completely new tool for lawyers that was just getting started. If anything, you know, if you did a search, you came up with literally hundreds of cases, that many of which were inapplicable, and so it was very, very difficult to work with at the start. We did our opinions the old-fashioned way.
What about how the practice has changed with billable hours?
Well, you know, billable hours are still a tool, you know, for certain types of things that simply don't lend themselves to a fixed fee. But for my clients, particularly in estate planning or where it's a project-oriented matter, we will try to give a fixed fee or a cap so that clients know what it's going to cost, so that they don't get shocked by some very, very large fee. But we're very, very sensitive, even with billable hours, to how successful we were and, you know, value for what we're doing. So we will look carefully at every bill before we send it out.
That surprises me because I left the practice 30 years ago. But how much of your business, and would you estimate, is that fixed fee as opposed to straight billable hours?
Oh, you know, almost everybody that I do estate planning for is done on a fixed fee basis. You know, with estate administration, I give an estimated fee, but we still bill on a billable hour basis. And then most of my general tax work is done on a billable hour basis. So I would say maybe a third of my practice is fixed fee, and the rest of it remains billable hour.
When did you first start getting involved with the bar associations?
Well, I got involved with the Bar Association, the Nashville Bar Association, and later the Tennessee Bar Association by doing speeches because people were interested in tax matters, estate planning, and things like that. And I had an interest in speaking and writing, and so I spoke for the Nashville Bar Association and the Tennessee Bar Association almost from the outset of me getting to Nashville. I got involved with the Bar Association. I went to bar functions on a regular basis when I first came to Nashville, and went to the Nashville bar picnics, and you know, we met loads. It was a wonderful way to meet older lawyers and younger lawyers, and you know, we had lots of fun there. I ended up on the Nashville Bar Board during the 80s, and continue to this day to attend meetings from time to time.
When and the statute of limitations has run, but did you ever go to any of the bar picnics at the Hobbs farm?
No. I know there was some of the bar picnics. There was gambling that went on,
among other things,
with dice tables.
Yeah, and ladies of the night.
Some of the leading members of the bar were there running the dice table.
And the judges.
Yes.
Who do you remember as being kind of leaders in the bar when you were on the bar board? Who?
Charlie Warfield was one of the leaders. Jim Weatherly was the leader of the bar. John Wagster. John Toon was another individual. There were a lot of senior people that worked in the Bar Association. Aubrey Harwell was involved in it.
And when you became involved with the Bar Association, was this your own personal interest, or did the firm?
Bill Willis was on the bar when I was on the Bar Association. Wonderful lawyer who was a very, very strongly a give back person.
And going back to the next question, was it a personal decision to do this, or did the firm urge you to do it, or was it a combination?
I would say to you that when I got involved with the Bar Association, I was at Boult. It was a personal decision. The firm liked everybody getting out, but it was always, the idea was to attract business one way or the other. Mr. Boult always was an advocate for being involved in your church because business came your way by being active in church matters as well.
When did you start getting involved with regional and national tax groups or estate planning groups?
Well, I was very active in the American Bar Association tax section. I was on the tax section committee, and then I was on the committee on exempt organizations as well, and I went to lots of American Bar Association annual and regional meetings. And then later in the late 80s, I got nominated and elected to the American College of Trust and Estate Council and became very active in AgTech.
And did you have leaderships, or
yes,
do you have leadership
I
positions?
served on the Board of Regents of the American College of Trust and Estate Council and was on the executive committee and led several committees as well.
And how has this affected your client development?
Well, the AgTech in particular, you meet lawyers, top estate lawyers and tax lawyers from all over the United States. And, when there's business in Tennessee, they tend to call people that they know. So it's been very, very good in terms of a client referral resource.
And how many members in Tennessee are there of that organization?
Oh, I think there are about 40 AgTech members in Tennessee.
And
there are quite a few in Nashville.
Are you particularly close to any of the other tax or estate lawyers in Nashville?
Yes. I'm friends with James Gooch and Richard Johnson, and I mean there are a good number of tax lawyers.
Is it a close community, I guess?
Lee Griffith is another one. Yes. I belong to a group called the No Name Tax Club that is made up of lawyers and accountants who are, meet every 2 weeks to give papers and talk about what's going on.
Every 2 weeks?
Every 2 weeks. You don't have to attend every 2 weeks, but it meets every 2 weeks.
And how long have they been doing this?
For 25 or 30 years.
Sounds suspicious, since I haven't heard about them. And now to the important part. You got more than a good education at the tax court. You also met your wife, Rita, there. Is that right?
Yes.
And
my wife worked in the fiscal office, and she brought me my paycheck. And at one point in time, she brought me some cookies. So I decided that maybe she liked me.
And so how long did y'all date before you got married?
We dated about 3 or 4 years. We got married in 1977.
And needless to say, she has taken to Nashville also.
Yes.
Where's Rita from?
She grew up in Buffalo, New York,
That's
and
right.
I brought her, when I moved back to Nashville, we came in August of 1975, and it was a brutal summer that summer, and being from Buffalo, she wasn't used to hot weather.
And
So it was a transition for her.
And I recall she was one of many children, is that right?
One of 12 children.
So she could tolerate you with little or no problem.
There you go.
And what are the names and ages of your children?
I have a son who is 36, whose name is Seth, And then I have a daughter who is 34, who is Molly.
And Seth is
Seth is in Portland, Oregon, works for an arena like for the Portland Trailblazers. And Molly is currently raising children here in Nashville, Tennessee, but is about to go back to the University of Rochester in New York.
And that's because her husband has...
Her husband is a professor
yeah.
there.
Grandchildren?
I've got two granddaughters by my son, and then my daughter has a son who's 2.5 years old and two grandchildren that are 6 months, twins.
And have they ever expressed, or did they ever express an interest in going into law?
No. Neither of my kids had any interest in practicing law. I think that they saw that I was out of the house quite a bit, and while it is a very rewarding career, it does have a significant time away from home.
Where have you had your religious affiliation in Nashville?
Well, my wife and I were married by Rabbi Falk at the temple and were members there. Some years ago, there was a split at the temple over intermarriage. My wife grew up as a Catholic, and we were an intermarried couple. And there was a dispute about that, and a new congregation was formed, a little more liberal on those issues, and called Congregation Micah. Mm-hmm. And then I was part of the initial group that, and I did all of the legal work in forming it.
So no good deed goes unpunished, and you have been in leadership roles out there.
Yes, I was on the board at Micah, and I was the president of Micah as well.
Okay, other than being active at Congregation Micah, what are your other hobbies?
Well, I'm very active in, I got older and my tennis game deteriorated. And so I swung over to golf, essentially when I got back to Nashville. I had played a lot of golf as a youth, but it was never my primary sport. But I played a lot of golf, met a lot of people, joined Richland Country Club back around 1981, and met a lot of friends, and then became active in the Tennessee Golf Association, and then helped found the Tennessee Golf Foundation, with its current president, Dick Horton, and been actively involved with those.
Before we move on to that, you were a member of Richland, also Golf Club of Tennessee.
I'm a member at the Golf Club of Tennessee as well, and I'm on the board of directors out there.
And what leadership roles did you have at Richland?
At Richland, I was on the board of directors for a good number of years, and I was the president of the club as well.
Did anything of interest happen when you were president?
Yes. Well, Richland Country Club was originally on West End Avenue on a very small piece of property. It only had 116 acres, and it was in high demand for redevelopment. And so as a result, eventually a developer worked out a deal where we would get a new club on Granny White, which we did. A new Jack Nicklaus 18-hole golf course, a new clubhouse. And shortly after we moved in there, and I was the president of the club, we started having landslides where the golf course had been built, and it was a massive problem, and we ended up suing Jack Nicklaus, who was the designer of the golf club, along with a number of other people involved in its development, and ultimately that got resolved after a couple of years of litigation. But that was an interesting experience to go through. Not
something you want to happen on your watch.
And I had the opportunity to negotiate with Jack Nicklaus one-on-one. But
is he a good negotiator?
He was very concerned about how the members felt. So he was, in fact, concerned that the golf course would turn out all right.
So you were favorably impressed by him?
Yes, I was.
Okay. Especially since he settled it with you, too.
They settled it once the insurance deductible ran out.
Do you have any particularly memorable golf runs, and where have your most memorable golf trips been to?
Well, over the years have developed many, many golf friends. One friend, Bill Aiken, is a big Scottish buff, And so I've been over to Scotland and Ireland with Bill Aiken and a number of other friends over the years. I play golf regularly with a friend named Phil Trella and Dudley Warner. I have some friends at Richland named Stan Cantani and Angelo Valenti and Larry Grissom that I play golf with on a regular basis. But I literally have hundreds of friends that I've played golf with over the years.
What about the most memorable trip? Most memorable? St. Andrews or?
I've been to St. Andrews. I've played St. Andrews. I had a hole-in-one at Royal Aberdeen in Scotland. I've had a bunch of memorable trips. And I've played many, many fine golf courses all over the United States as well. Golf is a wonderful pastime, although it's time-consuming.
And you also have an interest in poker.
I got involved when I first came to Nashville with Kraft Brothers. Kraft Brothers, an accounting firm in town, had a number of people that had a regular game going, and I got involved in it. And
who was in that game?
Kent Harrell, Phil Duncan, Lenny Essman, all of whom are now deceased. That game's kind of fallen by the wayside, and I now play in another game with a fellows named Buddy Rosen, Eric Chazen, Kenneth Jacobs is one game, Ken Kraft, and then I play in a game with George Payne and a number of other people as well.
That's more of a town and gown, Vanderbilt.
Yeah, a lot of Vanderbilt people, a lot of doctors in that group, small limits and mainly for fun.
And do you think your interest in poker came from your facility in tax, or that tax came as a consequence of your facility at poker?
Well, I have played poker on and off since about the 4th or 5th grade. I played poker when I was in college. I played it in law school. I played it when I was at the tax court, all with friends, all low limits. And so maybe that helped have an interest in taxation.
You are also a woodworker.
Yes, my wife and I, have always been kind of handymen around the house. And some years ago, after watching a fellow named Norm Abrams on TV, on public television, with a show called, I can't remember the name of the show now, but This Old House. Anyway, we got into buying a table saw and routers and saws and hand planes and so forth, and we build furniture for our house and for friends and do odd jobs. It's a lot of fun.
You've done some fairly sophisticated stuff.
I built the desk and
in your office.
In my office, and I built the computer table for my office. So.
And you have built major items of furniture for your home.
Built the dining room table in our home and different items of furniture.
Is this with exotic woods or really
Yes,
not?
yes. With mahogany and babinga and different kinds of wood.
And do you find it a good settling thing from
it's
the
a
stress
good outlet.
of law?
Lots of things associated with woodwork can take your mind off work and give you a good chance to relax and settle down.
And these are kind of some global questions. If you had it all to do over again, would you follow the same path?
Yes, I love practicing law. I love working with people, particularly in estate planning, but also in business as well. You get to hear lots of intimate details that people don't share even with their own families. And you help people solve problems. So I've always enjoyed that. And you've got quite a bit of freedom as well. While it's hard work, you have the time to do other things as well.
And a lot of people, lawyers in particular, complain about the business side of law. It's become more of a business than a profession. Do you have any sense of that? Or?
Yes. I always hate billing. And, I will say that I've had very, very few events over the course of my lifetime that have caused me to lose a client. But billing is one of the most problematic areas. And I've often said I would prefer to just get a check from somewhere than to have to bill clients, because most of my clients really become friends to me. and I care about their problems and their concerns, and I just as soon not have to bill them, but most of them tend to understand it.
Especially if you can show them where the value of your services are.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's an advantage you have as an estate and a tax lawyer.
Well, sometimes we show in tax savings, that you can help people, but sometimes it's just hard work and a good result.
Would you advise young people, college, seniors, juniors, to enter the practice of law?
I think so. It may change dramatically. There's mega firms that are growing with 900 or 1,000 lawyers in a firm that are all over the world, and those run like institutions, and practicing law in places like that will be very, very different, and it may not be as rewarding. Practicing law like I engage in, which is meeting with people, one of the things I didn't get when I worked in New York City, meeting with people and helping people solve problems is a very rewarding area, and will continue to be the hallmark of practicing law.
And what about your decision to pick Nashville over?
Nashville is just one of the great places to live. I've made great friends here. It's got a wonderful climate. The community is diverse and yet gets along very, very well. We've generally got pretty good government around Nashville. So all in all, while it's growing, and I'm a little nervous about how that growth is going to be contained or handled in a responsible manner, Nashville's still a great place to live.
And what's been the impact of your practice of law on your family and social life?
Well, I mean, number one, practicing law in Nashville, Tennessee has enabled me to live a very nice lifestyle. It's enabled me to take care of my family in a pretty nice manner. We've lived in the same house for more than 30 years, and we live in a nice area of town, and it's a nice, easy commute to the office. So it's been good.
What question haven't I asked you that you thought I should have asked you?
I think you've covered the waterfront, so I've been very pleased to try and respond.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you.